Hello and welcome to the Crisis Point podcast. I'm Eric Sammons, your host and the editor-in-chief of Crisis Magazine. Before we get started, just want to encourage people to like and subscribe to this channel, to this podcast, wherever you might be listening or watching to it. It helps other people find out about it. And I really appreciate all the people who've already done that. Our subscriber count has gone up pretty considerably in the past few months, and I really do appreciate that. So make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and I'd really appreciate that. Thanks. Okay, so could we possibly have 3 popes soon? Right now, of course, we have 2 popes, which, yes, I will get into the fact that we don't actually have 2 popes. But is it possible that at some point soon we could have 3 popes, 2 Pope Emeriti? And by the way, I am very proud of the fact that I'm using the plural form of emeritus correctly. 2 popes emeriti and 1 reigning pope. Well, that's the rumors lately. There's 2 rumors going about right now, and they're related to each other, and one might be causing the other rumor. One rumor is that Pope Francis is writing or considering writing a document about the role of a Pope Emeritus in the church, which is what Pope Benedict is. And the other rumor is that Pope Francis himself might soon become a Pope Emeritus, that he might himself resign the papacy. Now, there was a great article at Catholic News Agency. I forgot to put the link in the show notes. I'll do that afterwards for people who are watching later. With an analysis of this, what's behind the rumors that Pope Francis will resign. I thought it was a very good article. It gives a lot of the details of what's going on. But essentially what's happening is that word is that the Pope is either considering resigning or considering writing a document about the role of a Pope Emeritus, or maybe both. And a lot of people think that one is causing the other. Like the fact that he's writing an document about the role of a Pope Emeritus might mean that he's thinking about becoming one soon. Now, first, I just want to get right off the table immediately. I don't think Pope Francis will ever resign. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think, from what we know about him, that he seems the type of person to quit. And liberals in general don't quit anyway. And so I don't think that he will. I think he has the power to do what he wants to do, to affect change in the church the way he wants it to. And I can't see him giving it up. I just can't see him ever thinking about resigning the papacy. Now, that's because I think they fight till the end. Now, it's possible, and this is where the rumor comes from, that he wants to resign so that he can influence the next conclave. And I think this is related to the fact that I think he knows he doesn't have much longer on this earth. The rumors have been swelling a lot over the past few months that the Pope's health is not very good. Now, of course, the Vatican says it's great. But as I mentioned on Twitter one time, the Pope could be dead for 3 days before the Vatican would even say he has a cold. The Vatican is notorious about hiding any actual health problems of the Pope. And this isn't a Francis thing. This is a Vatican thing that's been going on for years, for decades. And so I actually think that the Pope Francis has not got the greatest health. I think when he was in the hospital, I think it was back in July, maybe it was June, for an operation. They thought he was going to be in the hospital just for a couple of days, and he was actually there for, I think, 2 weeks. Healthy people don't go to the hospital for 2 weeks. Now, it's possible that he's completely recovered from that, and he's done some public appearances, and he's got plans for travel and things like that. So I'm not saying he's on death's door, but I think he knows he's not a young man. He very well could not last another year. And if that's the case, perhaps being involved in the picking of his successor, who could then be Pope for another 10, 20 years, perhaps in his mind, how calculus is, okay, this will actually be more influential. I'll be able to have more of an impact on the church if I resign, help pick my successor, who will then reign much longer than I would be able to reign for. So I guess, I'm not saying that's impossible. I think it is possible, but I just don't think it will happen. I think he's going to hold on to the papacy until death, which, by the way, I think is the right thing for a pope to do. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. But I also think, though, that things like the Motu Proprio Traditionis Custodes about the Latin Mass that came out last month, I think that the harshness of it And the fact that it surprised me, bishops, it's not that people didn't know that a motu proprio was coming out, but the fact that it was so harsh and it was to be implemented immediately, even though bishops had not been informed about it ahead of time. I know my own bishop, I heard a radio interview with him where he expressed his frustration that he heard about it through the internet, which is, just ridiculous. And he was supposed to implement it immediately. As soon as he hears about it on the internet, he's supposed to implement it. And so I think, though, the fact that he did that shows that he's trying to get some things out the door. He wants some things to happen before he passes away, or perhaps before he resigns. So I think he knows that this is happening. So in fact, I would predict that in the next few months, we're going to see some more actions taken by this Pope to affect the changes he's been wanting to do for a while. And he wasn't waiting, because a lot of people thought he was waiting to do this motu proprio, cracking down the Latin Mass, until Pope Benedict died. But Pope Benedict has, very inconveniently for him, not passed away. And so therefore, he just released it anyway, because it's possible he will pass away before Pope Benedict does. So I think that's kind of what's going on here. So again, I don't think he's going to resign, but it's possible, of course. Now, what about this idea, though, that he's writing a document about the role of a Pope Emeritus in the church? Almost like this is going to be a common thing in the future. Because remember, Pope Benedict, when he resigned, he was the first Pope to resign since, I forget the century. I think it was like 13th century, 12th century, something like that. It had been like 800 years since he had resigned, since the Pope had resigned. And so the idea of a Pope Emeritus in the life of the church isn't something that is thought of too much, obviously. Now, let's take a step back first and talk about what is a Pope Emeritus before we talk about what its role is supposed to be. Essentially, it's the idea of a Bishop Emeritus, which is a thing in the church, and it's applied to the papacy. Now, a Bishop Emeritus is actually also a very new thing, because historically, bishops died in office. Bishops didn't resign their positions. They simply, or retire or anything like that. They simply died in office. Now, they might get transferred from one diocese to another, might get promoted to an archdiocese, something like that. But essentially, they would die as a practicing bishop. However, in the wake of Vatican II, there was the new canon law that all bishops have to submit their resignation, their retirement, at the age of 75. The Pope doesn't have to accept it, but they have to at the age of 75. And of course, with modern medicine, it's very easy that a man can live past 75. You have some men who live to be 100. And so you could have somebody who's a bishop for decades after he resigns from office. And so that is the origin of the Bishop Emeritus, a bishop that is still a bishop, because being a bishop is an episcopal ordination. It's a sacramental act. You can't stop being a bishop, just like you can't stop being a priest. And so a Bishop Emeritus is a bishop who is still a bishop, obviously, but he has no real canonical role, in the sense that he doesn't have any obligations with a diocese. He's still, though, attached to that last diocese he was the bishop of. I remember when I was working for a diocese down in Florida, there was a Bishop Emeritus who was still alive, and they had the custom in that diocese, in the prayers for the bishop in the Mass, they would mention the bishop, but they'd also mention the Bishop Emeritus in those prayers, which I thought was a little odd, because the proper thing to do is just to pray for the bishop. I didn't think it was that big a deal, but it was a little bit odd. It struck me when I was there. So a lot of Bishop Emeritus exists today. I think there's over 1,000. And essentially, the bishop obviously retains being a bishop. He keeps his emblem and his titles that he might have, but he is no longer in charge of a diocese. But what he becomes is almost like an associate bishop without any, an auxiliary bishop. There's no such thing as associate bishop, an auxiliary bishop without any real duties. So he might perform confirmations, he might, things like that nature, things, maybe give speaking engagements to represent the diocese that he used to be the bishop of, things like that. So it's really a figurehead in a lot of ways. That doesn't really do much other than things only a bishop can do, like confirmations. And so that's what a Bishop Emeritus is. And it's important to remember that the reason he's a Bishop Emeritus and he's still a bishop is because becoming a bishop is a sacramental act. It's an episcopal ordination. It's the fullness of the sacrament of holy orders. And so that's why you can't stop being a bishop. So there need to be this new thing when you have lots of retired bishops calling him a bishop emeritus. Okay, so if that's a bishop emeritus, then what's a Pope Emeritus? It's obviously based on the idea of a bishop emeritus. But honestly, Benedict literally created it out of thin air. In fact, the idea was before Benedict that if a pope retired, he became then he went back to being a cardinal. In fact, Pope Pius XII, he left a resignation. This is during World War II. He left a letter of resignation if the Nazis implemented their plan to kidnap him. There was a Nazi plan to kidnap him, and he thought, okay, if that happens, what should I do? So he left a letter of resignation, and he said, when they arrive, they will take Cardinal Pacelli and not Pope Pius XII. In other words, he knew it would be a problem if he was kidnapped by the Nazis if he was still the Pope. That would cause lots of problems. So he basically automatically would resign, and he would not be Pope Emeritus, but now he'd be Cardinal Rosselli again. He'd revert back to being a cardinal. And in fact, when Pope Benedict first resigned, initially people thought that's what would happen. Now he's Cardinal Ratzinger again, or even maybe Father Ratzinger. Because the problem there is, though, if he was Cardinal Ratzinger, then he would be a member of the conclave that would elect the next bishop. The next pope. And that would be a problem as well, because it just seems it would just be unseemly that all of a sudden somebody would be, the former pope would be electing his successor, helping elect his successor. You could have a lot of influence on the conclave. By the way, somebody in the comments, thank you, David, mentioned that there are 1,461 living bishops and archbishops emeriti. That's a lot of emeriti. 1,461 right now. Thanks, David, for that. And so the Pope Emeritus, the idea of a Pope Emeritus, I think part of the reason that Benedict chose this option instead of reverting back to being a cardinal is he didn't want to influence the next conclave. He wasn't going to be a part of the next conclave as Pope Emeritus. He continued to wear white, his white cassock, the papal cassock. He continued to be called Your Holiness. And so the idea was that he's still a Pope Emeritus. He still has some part of the papacy. It was very confusing. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, he did this because he considered, somebody argued that he considered the papacy a second episcopal ordination. So he can't really give it up. And we'll see in a minute, that's just not the case. The papacy is not a ordination. It's not a sacramental act. Becoming pope isn't. It's essentially what you're doing is you're transferring the diocese you're the bishop of. So, for example, if the bishop of a small diocese in Wisconsin becomes the Archbishop of Washington, D.C., for example, there's no new sacramental act that makes that happen. There is a ceremony. There is something that happens, a consecration that happens so that he now is the bishop, the Archbishop of Washington. But he doesn't become a new bishop, a new super bishop, or anything like that. Same thing with the Pope. When a bishop, a cardinal becomes Pope, he does not have a new sacramental act bestowed upon him. And so this is a very odd thing that Pope Benedict decided that he's going to be this Pope Emeritus. To be honest, I don't think he thought it out very much. In fact, it seems like it was like kind of almost a last minute. Like, yes, he had been thinking about retiring for a while, but the idea of what he would do after that, I don't think he really thought it out, which is kind of uncharacteristic of Pope Benedict. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in a minute about all the problems of being a Pope Emeritus. But let's say, what is the role then of a Pope Emeritus? Well, Benedict, he kind of presented it as a contemplative role, that he would stay in a secluded monastery perhaps and pray for the papacy, pray for the church. That would be the role of the Pope Emeritus. Now, Pope Benedict himself hasn't always kept to that, because we've had a lot of different things he said since then. He's been seen in public numerous times. Like I said, he wears the white. He still appears to be the Pope when he is out and about. And so the idea, though, of Pope Benedict is that it's a contemplative role. But remember, this is something he made up. There is no precedence for a Pope Emeritus in the church. Now, there have been retired popes who have been alive, but they did not call themselves Pope Emeritus, and they did not try to act like they still have some role in the church as the Pope Emeritus. That's the innovation of Benedict. Not that he retired, because that, like I said, that happened before, but that he thought he had some unique new role as a retired pope. That's the innovation of Benedict. And it looks like Francis might be trying to define this role more specifically, because he perhaps foresees a future where there are retired popes hanging out. Like I said, there could be 3 different people men who have been pope alive at the same time. There could be 5, there could be a dozen. However, if you retire, I mean, people live long enough now, who knows? And so this is also why people think this would be the reason why Francis would resign, because he could have influence. If he, for example, decreed that a Pope Emeritus could participate in the conclave, at least maybe not as a voting member, but as somebody who could be there and promote his own guy or something like that as his successor, then you could see him perhaps retiring, leaving the papacy in order that he could do that. Now, it should be clear at this point that this whole thing is a mess. The whole idea of a Pope Emeritus was a terrible idea by Pope Benedict. And just to be clear, I love Cardinal Ratzinger. I love Pope Benedict in so many ways. I've read so many of his writings. They deeply have helped my own practice of the Catholic faith. I remember when I first became Catholic, I went off to Franciscan University of Steubenville soon after that to get my master's degree in theology. And I read so much Ratzinger. This was early 90s. I read so much Ratzinger. I mean, I would just read hundreds and hundreds of pages a day of Ratzinger. It was amazing to me. It really opened my eyes to a lot. However, this was just a terrible idea. Because first of all, it leads to so many problems. First of all, it's led to the belief that he didn't really resign the papacy. A lot of Catholics, when I say a lot, it's all relative. Out of 2 billion Catholics, it's actually not that many. But a lot of Catholics you hear online, they believe that Benedict is still the Pope, that Francis isn't the Pope, that by doing what he did, by calling himself the Pope Emeritus, by still wearing white and saying that he still had a role in the papacy, that somehow either his resignation wasn't valid, or it was somehow not real. It wasn't really him resigning. He was actually still retaining the papacy. I mean, there's lots of different points there. But the point is that he still is the Pope. That's the first confusion, which is terrible. I mean, Benedict himself has said numerous times, I am not the Pope anymore. There are not 2 popes. There's only one Pope, and it's Francis. But obviously, this whole idea of him wearing white, being called Your Holiness, being called Pope Emeritus, saying he has a role in the papacy still, that leads to a lot of confusion. That's a big problem. But also another big problem is that the Pope, one of his primary roles in the church, is a source of unity. And you can't have unity if there's 2 of them. The whole point of unity is unite as one. And so we're united around one Pope. I mean, there was a movie called The 2 Popes, and there is no possibility of having 2 popes at the same time. You can only have one Pope. But we do have 2 men who are being called Your Holiness, 2 men who are calling themselves Pope something, either Pope Francis or Pope Emeritus Benedict. So you can see why for a lot of people this can be very confusing. It can cause lots of problems. In fact, a lot of liberal Catholics don't like it because they think it causes a lot of conservative Catholics to kind of back Benedict against Francis, to pit him against Francis. But they're right. It is a terrible situation to have 2 different men who are kind of the Pope. One is the Pope, one is kind of calling himself Pope Emeritus. Now, a lot of people think that this just seems strange that Ratzinger would do this because he's supposedly a traditionalist, supposedly doesn't innovate. I've read Ratzinger. He does innovate. I mean, at times he's not a traditionalist as we think of them today, in the sense that he really holds fast to keeping things the way they were, particularly before Vatican II. He embraced the Vatican II vibe of innovating for the sake of the modern world. And so this is an innovation of Benedict's. An innovation. He is pushing theology to its limits, trying to think of this idea of a Pope Emeritus. But honestly, ultimately, he created a mess. He created a mess in a lot of ways. And it was both a mistake. First of all, I do think it was a mistake for him to quit. I don't think a pope should quit. I'm not saying it's not valid if a pope quits. I just don't think, I think the witness of John Paul II in not quitting is a greater witness than Francis Benedict. Because what do we call the Pope? We call him our Holy Father. Well, I'm a father of 7. I can't quit that task. I could leave my family. I could abandon them. I'm still their father. I'm a terrible father at that point, but I'm still their father. You can't stop being a father. And I really believe, symbolically, if nothing else, Benedict's decision to quit was just a terrible one for the church because he abandoned his post. He abandoned his role as our father. Now, so that's one big problem. But then the second mistake was to use the Pope Emeritus title. What he should have done is he should have put the black cassock back on. I think he probably should even just call himself Father Ratzinger and said he's kind of giving up the cardinalate as well. Maybe Bishop Ratzinger is fine because he is ordained as bishop. And I do think it would be probably weird if you went back to Father Ratzinger. So let's just say he would be called Archbishop or Bishop Ratzinger. No longer a cardinal, even that way. We don't have to worry about the issue of him attending a conclave and influencing it. But essentially, though, he would wear black and he would not be called Your Holiness anymore. He'd be called either Your Eminence. No, not even Your Eminence, because he wouldn't be, I'd say he should turn down being a cardinal. He should be called Your Excellency and leave it at that and stay quiet and stay out of the limelight. Actually stay in seclusion like he said he would. That would have solved so many problems. So if Francis is thinking about writing a document on Pope Emeritus, I pray, I don't think this is going to happen, I pray that that's what he would recommend, that he basically say, okay, wear black, be called Your Excellency, be a bishop, not a cardinal, and live in seclusion. I think that would be the right thing, because even though the Bishop Emeritus of dioceses are out and about, they will give talks, they will do confirmations and other things like that. I don't think the former pope should do that, because it just is a bad it's bad symbolism. It affects how we look at the papacy. We look at the papacy now, and we've been doing this anyway, but I do think it also fosters this idea of the papacy as being a political position like the presidency, and each presidency has its own policies, and the next president can just change them, like the Mexico City policy is in America, where the Republican president will do one thing on, and the Democrat will overturn him, and then the next Republican will overturn him. And I think that's what we're seeing already, like with the Latin Mass, that Pope Benedict, he allowed the Latin Mass more freely. Pope Francis is overriding that. The next pope, maybe he'll override that. But having other popes around and where they're resigning, it gives this sense that the Pope is a political office only, and it's not really an institution of unity in the church, and that you don't, and that it's more than, it's a true vocation. It's more than just, okay, this is our latest occupant and the next guy could just override him. It's more a sense of, I'm trying to maintain what I've been given by my fathers. So I think that's really the problem. So somebody, just real quick, I want to interrupt to say that's a good question from David, said, if the document is along those lines I was saying about, let's restrict the Pope Emeritus, what they're doing, wear black and things like that, would it apply to Benedict or only in the future? I could see him giving a grandfather clause to Benedict, but I think this is one reason why he wouldn't do it, because of the fact that I don't think he'd want to tell Benedict, okay, start wearing black. I think he should, frankly. I think Francis should tell Benedict, start wearing black. We're going to call you Your Excellency, you're a bishop again, and that's all you are. I don't think there's any chance he would actually do that, to be honest. And honestly, I think there's a good chance that Francis is leaning towards have a Pope Emeritus actually have a formal role in the church, like I was talking about. So I think that's really what we're talking about here. I don't have a whole bunch more to say on this. I think it's important that we pray for the Pope, the actual Pope, which is Pope Francis, just to be clear. We pray for Ratzinger, Benedict, whatever we want to call him. That's the other thing, real quick. I think he should go back to being his non-papal name. So he should be called Bishop or Archbishop Ratzinger, not Bishop Benedict. That would make no sense to call him that. So I think we should pray for him, obviously, as well. They both are old men. we're not going to be in this situation much longer. I can't see it lasting. I mean, it's lasted for 8+ years now. I can't see it lasting much longer. One or both of them are going to die pretty soon. And so, who knows what the issues will come up from there. But I think we should pray for both of them, pray especially for Pope Francis. If he is thinking about having a role, Pope Emeritus, what I would love, actually, now I think about it, I'd love the document about role Pope Emeritus be, there is no such thing. And that's the whole document. There is no such thing as a Pope Emeritus. That's what I want the document to say. It's probably not going to, but let's pray for that maybe, if that would happen. So let's pray that this whole confusing situations get settled. I mean, I personally hope that Pope Benedict dies first before Pope Francis. I just call him Pope Benedict. I know I'm not keeping up with my own, what I want it to be. But anyway, I hope Ratzinger Benedict dies first, simply because otherwise, if he doesn't, there's still people saying that Benedict is still the Pope and that whole confusion. But let's just hope this mess gets sorted out, that both of them pass away. Eventually they both will. And then that we just have one person who's wearing white, one man who's saying he's the Pope. And I'm praying, okay, I think I've said this before, I'll say it again. This is kind of an aside. When the next Pope comes out there, there's a couple things I could see him giving himself name and my reaction to it. If he says he's Francis II, okay, I think we all just need to start wearing hair shirts, praying, fasting, sackcloth and ashes, and all that, because it's going to be a problem. If he calls himself, let's say John Paul III, that's better than Francis, but we might still have some issues. It might just be somebody who wants to really go gung-ho on Vatican II in a slightly more conservative way. But if he comes out and he says, my name is Pius XIII, then we give it a big thumbs up. And we say, okay, now we're going down the right path. But whoever it is, obviously we should be praying for that man. That man is alive. Whoever the next Pope is, he's alive right now. Let's be praying for him, that he's guided by the Holy Spirit as well when he becomes Pope and even beforehand. So anyway, that's it for now. I just want us to be praying for Pope Francis, Pope Emeritus Benedict / Bishop Ratzinger / whatever you want to call him, that this whole mess gets settled, and that soon we have one man who's wearing white, and that he is leading the church in a very solid and traditional and Catholic way. Okay, well, that's it for now. Until next time, God love you.